The first time her tiny body slipped, it felt like time itself cracked open. 1 second she was balanced on the ledge, her arms full of laundry, her feet bare against the stone, and the next, she was falling. I didn't think. My hands shot forward on instinct, and suddenly she was in my arms. Her breath came in sharp gasps, her eyes wide and luminous, reflecting the desert sun like pools of liquid silver. For a heartbeat, neither of us moved. She clung to me, her fingers digging into my chest as if I were the only solid thing left in her world. And maybe, in that instant, I was. I felt her trembling all through her small frame, and I realized she wasn't just holding on for balance. She was holding on as though she'd never let go. That was the beginning. I never meant to hire a maid in the first place. On this planet, in the middle of the HFY desert, survival is already a kind of work, every single day. Water doesn't flow freely, supplies don't arrive on schedule, and storms are as regular as the moon rising. But when I set up my camp by the ridges, word spread quickly through the market settlement that I'd need help. A tent, a generator, and food stores attract attention, and in this galaxy, attention is dangerous. So when the old broker offered me her services, a maid from one of the alien tribes, I almost laughed. I didn't want company. I didn't need it. But then I saw her. She was small, no taller than my shoulder, her turquoise skin dusted in gold powder that caught the light, her long hair braided neatly down her back. And her eyes, those liquid silver eyes, watched everything with quiet caution. She didn't speak much, but the broker insisted she was skilled at cleaning, tending, and cooking simple meals. I didn't believe it, but I also didn't want to attract suspicion by refusing. So I paid the fee, and suddenly I had a maid. At first, she was more shadow than person. She moved silently, keeping to corners, never speaking unless spoken to. The desert heat pressed down on both of us, yet she carried out her duties without complaint, folding my blankets, boiling water, sweeping sand from the tent floor though the dunes always pushed it back in. I told myself I wouldn't notice her. She was just another arrangement, temporary, nothing more. But then came the fall. It happened 2 weeks after she arrived. A dust storm had passed the night before, shaking the scaffolding I used to hang tools and supplies. I was inside the tent, checking the generator, when I heard a sudden shout, a small, sharp cry that sliced the stillness. I rushed out just in time to see her lose her balance, her foot slipping off the cracked ledge where she had gone to hang washed clothes. The world slowed. I caught her midair. Her tiny body slammed into mine, light yet urgent, as though her entire existence had just been transferred to my arms. I could feel her heart racing like a wild animal. She didn't let go. I told her she was safe. I set her on her feet. But her hands clung to me, tight, desperate, refusing to leave my chest. For a moment, her wide silver eyes met mine, and there was something raw in them, something more than fear. After that, everything changed. She followed me everywhere. If I moved to the generator, she was at my side, her hands brushing the wires as if learning through touch. If I fetched water from the storage barrels, she was there too, carrying a smaller jug though it was half her weight. When I sat to eat, she hovered behind my shoulder until I asked her to sit across from me. And even then, her gaze stayed fixed on me, like she expected me to vanish the moment she blinked. At night, when the desert fell silent except for the wind, I sometimes woke to find her curled just outside my sleeping cot, not asleep but watching, always watching. It should have unsettled me. Maybe it did. But there was something else too, something unspoken that pulled at me. Her silence was not emptiness, it was weight. Her presence, her watchfulness, it carried stories I didn't know, scars I couldn't see yet. And when her small fingers brushed mine, even by accident, it was as though a current passed through me, warming places I didn't realize were cold. I told myself she clung out of gratitude. I had caught her when she fell, and perhaps in her tribe, that meant something binding. But late at night, staring at the tent roof, I wasn't sure if I believed that anymore. There were moments, fleeting, dangerous moments, when I wondered if her grip on me wasn't just desperation, but choice. Like the night after the rescue, when the desert was lit silver by twin moons. I stood outside the tent, the air crisp after the storm, and she appeared beside me without a sound. She didn't speak, just slipped her tiny hand into mine and held it, her gaze fixed on the horizon. We stood like that for a long time, two shadows in the desert, bound by something neither of us could name. And when she finally let go, it felt wrong, like a story cut short. The days that followed only deepened the tension. Every glance from her lingered too long, every touch carried heat. My heartbeat betrayed me when she brushed against me in the cramped tent, and I hated myself for noticing. She was my maid. My responsibility. Nothing more. But the way she clung told a different story. The moment that sealed it came a week later, in the middle of a supply run to the market. Crowds bustled through the narrow streets, traders shouting, the air thick with smoke and spices. I moved through it easily enough, but she, tiny, fragile, was nearly swallowed by the sea of bodies. I reached back instinctively, my hand closing around hers. Her fingers locked onto mine like iron. Even when we cleared the crowd, even when we reached the quiet of the sand dunes, she didn't release me. She walked all the way back to the tent with her hand in mine, her grip firm, her silence louder than any words. That night, as the desert winds rattled the canvas, I finally asked her why. Why wouldn't she let go? She looked up at me, silver eyes shining in the lamplight, and whispered the first words she'd ever spoken without being asked. Because if I let go, I might lose you. Her voice broke something inside me. And for the first time, I realized I was the one clinging to her too, in ways I didn't want to admit. The story was only beginning. The morning after her words, because if I let go, I might lose you, I couldn't look at her the same way. Something had shifted between us, like the desert itself had tilted and left me walking at an angle I couldn't quite correct. She moved around the tent as always, quietly folding blankets, pouring water, dusting sand from the floor. But her every motion carried an invisible thread tied to me. She glanced at me more now. Not shyly, not with the cautious distance she once had, but with a steady, unblinking devotion that pressed against me like heat. When our eyes met, she didn't flinch away. She held me there, her silver gaze saying things words couldn't carry. I tried to convince myself it was nothing more than gratitude. That she was bound by some cultural instinct, some tribal vow I didn't understand. But the longer she lingered at my side, the harder it was to pretend. Gratitude fades. Fear dulls. What she showed me was sharper, brighter, alive. One afternoon, while repairing the generator, I caught her watching me from the doorway. Her hands were clasped tightly at her chest, as if holding something inside. My shirt was off, sweat streaking my back from the heat, and I noticed the way her gaze traced every scar, every line of muscle, every reminder of battles I'd fought long before she came into my life. She wasn't afraid of those scars. She studied them like they were proof of something she trusted. When I turned, she didn't look away. I wanted to ask her why she watched me that way. Instead, I simply handed her a spanner and said, "Hold this." She took it in both hands, as though it were sacred. And she stayed there, crouched beside me, her small shoulder brushing mine each time I moved. That night, I couldn't sleep. Her whispered confession replayed in my head, unraveling all the walls I'd built. I'd lived a long time keeping distance between myself and others. Out here, attachments were dangerous. You could lose anyone in a storm, a raid, or worse. Better to live alone, untouched. That was what I'd told myself. But now, with her so close, her tiny breaths soft in the dark, I found myself listening for them like a lifeline. Days turned into weeks, and her clinging grew subtler yet deeper. She no longer grabbed my arm outright but walked close enough that her shoulder brushed against mine. When I sat by the fire, she perched beside me without invitation, her knees folded neatly, her long hair brushing the sand. She began preparing meals differently too, placing the best portions on my plate without a word, as though she'd decided it was her role to keep me strong. It wasn't just devotion. It was intimacy blooming in silence. Still, part of me resisted. I tried to create distance, small at first. I told her she didn't have to follow me to the water barrels, that she could stay behind and rest. She nodded obediently, then appeared at my side minutes later, carrying her own jug. When I asked her not to hover at the market, she slipped through the crowd like a shadow and emerged gripping my sleeve, refusing to let go. Finally, one evening, as the desert winds howled outside, I turned to her and said, You don't need to stay so close. You're safe here. No one's going to take you." Her eyes widened, and for the first time, I saw pain flash across her face. She stepped closer instead of retreating. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice trembling. "Then tell me," I pressed gently. But she shook her head, lowering her gaze, her silver eyes shimmering with secrets she couldn't yet share. And when I tried to move past her, she caught my hand, pressing it to her chest. I felt the thundering of her heart. "If I stay close, you're real," she said softly. "If I don't, maybe you disappear." I didn't know what to say. So I didn't say anything at all. I let her cling, because to pull away felt cruel. And maybe, deep down, I didn't want her to stop. Over time, I began to notice the little ways she had learned me. The way she knew I preferred my water cool, so she set the clay jug in the shade hours before I asked. The way she hummed softly while sweeping the sand, only when she knew I was nearby. The way she adjusted my cot so the desert wind never blew directly on me while I slept. She was learning me like I was her home. And I realized, with an unease that bordered on longing, that I was learning her too. One night, I caught her outside the tent, staring at the stars. The moons cast silver light on her turquoise skin, her braid glinting with faint gold. She looked small against the vastness of the desert sky, fragile and yet unbroken. I stepped beside her, and without hesitation, she slipped her hand into mine again. "Do you miss them?" I asked quietly. "Your people?" She hesitated, then shook her head. "They never saw me." Her words sliced through me. I turned to her, but she kept her gaze on the stars, her silver eyes reflecting distant galaxies. "You see me," she added, her voice barely audible over the wind. "That's enough." I didn't sleep that night either. Her words clung to me as tightly as she did. The days that followed blurred into a rhythm, her presence beside me, her eyes watching me, her hands brushing against mine in ways that left me restless. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to break it. Because every time she clung to me, a part of me clung back. The desert is not a kind place. It strips away illusions, leaves only what's real. And what was real now was the bond forming between us, fragile but fierce, born from a moment when she slipped and I caught her. But bonds like that don't go unnoticed. It was during a supply run 2 weeks later that I felt the shift. Whispers in the market, eyes tracking us, lingering too long on her small form at my side. A pair of traders speaking in hushed tones, their gazes sharp with recognition. She squeezed my hand tighter, her body tensing. She knew something. That night, back at the tent, she didn't let go of me at all. Not when I Saturday. Not when I stood. Not even when I lay down to rest. She curled against me like a shadow terrified of the light, her silver eyes wide open in the dark. And in that silence, I understood her clinging wasn't just gratitude or affection. It was fear. Fear of being taken. Fear of being dragged back to whatever past she had barely hinted at. Fear that I was the only thing standing between her and a world that wanted her gone. And in that moment, as her small hand tightened around mine, I knew, whatever secret she carried, it was about to find us. The whispers in the market didn't leave me. They followed us back to camp, echoing in the wind long after we'd returned to the safety of the tent. I tried to convince myself it was paranoia, just another trick of my soldier's instincts. But the way her hand shook in mine, the way her eyes darted at every shadow, told me otherwise. She knew. That night, she didn't sleep. I woke more than once to find her sitting cross-legged at the tent flap, staring out into the dunes as if expecting figures to emerge from the darkness. Her silver eyes glowed faintly in the lamplight, her braid undone, her shoulders tense. She looked more like a sentinel than a maid. I should have asked her what she feared. I should have demanded the truth then. But something in her expression, the raw fragility wrapped in fierce determination, kept me silent. If she wanted to tell me, she would. And if she didn't, then all I could do was wait. The waiting didn't last long. 3 days later, as the twin suns dipped toward the horizon, I spotted them. 2 figures on the ridge, cloaked, watching the tent from afar. They didn't approach, didn't wave. They just stood there until the light faded, and then they vanished. I pretended not to notice, but she did. Her hands trembled as she prepared the evening meal, and when I reached for her wrist, she flinched. Not from me, but from something deeper. "Who are they?" I asked. She shook her head, refusing to meet my eyes. "I don't know." But her voice betrayed her. It cracked on the last word, and I knew. She knew exactly who they were. The following morning, I pushed her gently. "If you trust me, tell me what you're running from." Her lips parted, but no sound came out. For a long time, she just stared at me, her silver eyes wide and wet, her hands gripping the edge of the blanket like it was the only thing tethering her to this world. Then she whispered, "They'll take me back. They always try." "Back where?" I pressed softly. Her gaze dropped. Her voice was almost inaudible. "To the house where I wasn't a person." The words chilled me more than the desert night. Before I could speak, she added, "You saved me once. Don't let them take me." Then she reached for me, clinging with a desperation that rattled every wall I had left. That evening, they came closer. I heard the crunch of boots on sand, the muffled murmur of voices outside the tent. Instinct surged through me. I grabbed my rifle and shoved her gently behind me. The canvas walls rattled with the wind, and the glow of lanterns cast long shadows. "Stay here," I whispered. Her hands grabbed my arm. "Don't go." But I went anyway. Outside, two men stood at the edge of the campfire's glow. Their faces were masked with cloth, but their stance was clear, hunters. They looked at me as though I were an inconvenience, a wall between them and what they wanted. "We're here for her," one said bluntly. "She doesn't belong to you," I replied, my voice flat. "She doesn't belong to you either." The desert wind hissed between us. My grip tightened on the rifle, but I didn't lift it. "Not yet." "She's property," the other spat. "Runaway property. Hand her over and no one gets hurt." Something inside me snapped. Property. The word curdled in my gut. I thought of her silver eyes watching the stars, her tiny hands slipping into mine, her voice whispering, "You see me." "I don't hand over people," I said. The standoff lasted only seconds before they backed away. Not because they were afraid of me, but because they wanted to test me. They'd be back. I knew it. When I re-entered the tent, she was curled against the wall, knees drawn to her chest. Her eyes lifted to mine, full of terror and shame. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I should have told you sooner." I knelt beside her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. "Tell me now." So she did. Between halting breaths, she told me of the house where she was raised, not as family, not even as servant, but as object. Bought, traded, used. Her tribe had been scattered by war, and she was taken as a child, trained to obey, never to question. When she was old enough to resist, punishment followed. But she had escaped once, slipping away under cover of night. "They think they own me," she said bitterly, her small fists clenched. "They'll never stop looking." Her words cut me open. All the times she had clung to me, all the silence, all the watching, it wasn't just affection. It was survival. She had chosen me as her anchor, her shield against a world that would strip her bare again. And now that world had found her. That night, she refused to let go of me at all. She clung to my side even as I lay down, her small body trembling against mine. I wrapped my arms around her without thinking, and for the first time, I held her as tightly as she held me. In the silence, I realized something terrifying. She wasn't just afraid of losing me. I was afraid of losing her. The next day, the hunters returned. This time, they didn't stay at the ridge. They walked straight into camp, bold and unafraid, as though the desert itself had granted them permission. I stepped out to meet them, my rifle slung across my chest. "You've had your warning," I said. "And so have you," one sneered. They moved too quickly. One drew a weapon, the other reached for the tent flap. In that instant, instinct overrode thought. I fired. The shot cracked across the dunes, sending one sprawling into the sand. The other froze, his hand inches from the canvas. His eyes narrowed at me, filled with promise of vengeance, before he dragged his companion away. The desert swallowed them, but I knew it wasn't over. When I turned back, she stood in the doorway of the tent, her silver eyes wide with shock and something else, something fierce. She rushed to me, her hands gripping mine, her voice breaking. "You'll get killed for me," she whispered. "Maybe," I admitted. "But I'd rather die than let them take you." Her tears spilled silently, her small body trembling against my chest. She clung harder than ever, but this time, I didn't resist. Because I finally understood her survival and mine were no longer separate. We were bound. And if they came again, I would fight. Not because she was fragile, not because she needed saving, but because I couldn't imagine a world without her hand in mine. The desert never forgets. It holds footprints for days, whispers of voices in the dunes, the smell of smoke long after the fire is gone. I knew the men would return, and when they did, it would not be with threats and warnings. It would be with force. We spent the next nights in a fragile rhythm of waiting. I trained her on how to pack quickly, how to recognize the sound of boots in sand, how to duck at the first crack of gunfire. She listened, eyes wide, hands gripping mine as if to anchor herself to every word. But she never spoke of leaving me. She never asked if I regretted taking her in. She only clung tighter, as though her presence was both apology and vow. And as the suns bled across the horizon each evening, I realized something had shifted in me too. I no longer saw her as fragile, as someone I had to shield in silence. She was small, yes. But inside her was a will that had survived cages, punishments, and pursuit. She had chosen to hold on to me not because she was weak, but because she was strong enough to decide where she belonged. The storm came on the fourth night. Not the desert kind with dust and wind, but the human kind, with boots and steel and the smell of blood in the air. They came in numbers this time. 6, armed, their silhouettes etched against the twin moons. I woke before they reached the camp. Some part of me had been waiting for this moment, heart already pounding before the first shout split the night. "They're here," I whispered. She was already awake, silver eyes wide, clutching at my arm. "Don't leave me." "I won't." The next minutes blurred into chaos. Shots cracked, sand sprayed, canvas tore. I fired back, moving through the tense shadows, keeping her behind me. But they were relentless. One lunged through the flap, grabbing for her with rough hands. She screamed, high, sharp, raw, and before I could react, she fought back. She bit, scratched, kicked with a fury that shocked even me. The man cursed, reeling, and I fired, ending it in an instant. When the smoke cleared, 2 lay still in the sand, the rest fleeing into the dunes. My chest heaved with exhaustion, sweat streaking my face. And then I felt her arms around me, her small body pressed tight, her sobs muffled against my chest. "I'm sorry," she whispered over and over. "I'm sorry you had to fight for me." I pulled her back, meeting her eyes. "Don't you ever apologize for being worth fighting for." Her tears shimmered in the moonlight. And then, for the first time, she reached for my face, her small hands trembling against my jaw. "Why?" she asked. "Why do you keep me, when the world tells you to let me go?" I had no rehearsed answer. Just truth. "Because you're mine," I said softly. "Not as property. Not as duty. But as the only person I can't bear to lose." Her breath caught. For a long moment, silence stretched between us, filled only by the wind. Then she leaned forward, pressing her forehead to mine. "And you're mine," she whispered. That night, there was no distance left. No unspoken walls. She lay curled against me not out of fear, but out of choice. Her tiny hands, always clinging, now rested with a calm certainty. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was living. The days that followed were quiet. The hunters did not return. Perhaps the desert had swallowed them, or perhaps they finally understood what they were up against. Either way, peace settled over the camp like a fragile blessing. But peace does not erase scars. I saw it in the way her eyes flicked to every shadow, the way her hands still sought mine when we walked the dunes. Yet now, when she clung, it wasn't only from fear. It was from devotion, from love carved into her bones by choice. One evening, as the sun sank and painted the sky in fire, she sat beside me on the ridge. The wind tugged her braid loose, strands of turquoise hair glowing in the light. She was quiet for a long time, her silver eyes fixed on the horizon. Finally, she spoke. "All my life, I thought I was small because they told me I was. They said I was property, fragile, nothing. But when I held on to you, I felt bigger than I'd ever been. I reached for her hand, weaving my fingers through hers. You don't need me to be big, I said. But I'll hold you anyway, if you want me to. Her smile was faint, but it was real. She leaned against me, her head resting on my shoulder. I want you to. The desert winds carried our silence, our closeness, our quiet vow. And for the first time in years, I felt something I'd forgotten: peace. Because the truth was simple. She had been running her whole life, clinging to survival wherever she could. But now, she wasn't running anymore. And neither was I. We had chosen each other. And in a galaxy where ownership and power so often defined worth, we had found something stronger. Not ownership. Not survival. But love. Moral closing note for audience. Real strength doesn't come from fighting alone, nor from claiming ownership over another. It comes from the courage to hold on to someone freely, knowing they could let go but they choose not to. Under desert moons, with silver eyes and scarred hands bound together, we learned that to cling is not weakness. It is trust. It is love. And love is the only thing no one can take away.